Hello, I'm Paul, and this is Ask Paul. Let's see what we have today. Jim in Ormond Beach, Florida. At what point and to what extent should system cables be separated? I've heard that speaker cables, I've heard the speaker cable story. If it's true. What about AC power, interconnects, outside cables from antennas and other sources and support devices? Is cleanliness and organization of cables next to sound godliness? Thanks, Jim. Well, that's an interesting question because there are certainly schools of thought from many people that I know that want to keep everything as separate as possible. So let's think about why would we want to do that? Why would we not want two cables close together? The only reason that we would not want them close together is in fear that they would interfere with each other, right? So when an electrical signal goes down a wire, it creates a field, okay? That's basic electronics, where we have a group of electrons traveling down a wire. It makes a magnetic field, and it also radiates a sound, not a sound field, but an electrical field. So the more energy that goes through these, i.e. speaker cables, for instance, they have a fairly wide or broad spectrum of radiation because there's a lot of power going through there, where an interconnect probably has a very tiny field and doesn't radiate so much of electromagnetic interference that comes out of it. So, and not to mention that most interconnects are shielded. And we can talk a little about shielding in a later video if you want, but essentially shielding is a woven or a tinfoil wrapped ground that protects the inner core, which has the signal. If it's a balance cable, there are two wires inside of that inner core, and if it's a RCA single-ended, there's one core cable inside the shield. The shield is ground, and it keeps unwanted noises from coming into the cable, and it also does the opposite. It helps keep what you have going through the cable in the cable, so it doesn't radiate out. So shielding a cable really helps keep stuff from getting in or from getting out. So if you're using shielded cables, probably not real important to get the distance that people have talked about, where you need to separate them out a couple of feet. And on the other side, you also probably don't want to have them just touching each other. So you want to have a little bit of separation. So I would say, in general, the greater amount of power that goes through, i.e. power cables and speaker cables, those kinds of cables will have far greater fields than signal cables. And so you want to keep those higher power cables separated. And you also want to try and keep them off the ground. And there's a reason for that. Speaker cables in particular, you want to try and elevate them off the ground because the ground acts as it's ground. And so you're going to be able to have a difference between when it radiates to the ground if it's sitting up in the air. So it's usually a good idea to keep speaker cables, which generally are not shielded, from touching the ground. Now, I don't pay a lot of attention to that. I will take my cables, which I use a large ribbon cable made by MG Audio of Colorado. In fact, there's one right here. Hang on. Don't go away. You can see them right here. So this is, just happen to have a pair sitting here. This is a very broad, wide cable. There's two conductors, one on each side, the hot and the ground. It's in a ribbon. And these are very tough to make. And Lee made these for me from MG Audio. They are a fine, fine cable. I love the things. But there's no shielding. This is just a plastic mesh to make it look nice and to protect it. So this kind of cable, what I do is I set it up on end, kind of like that. Probably not the best. I should elevate it off the ground if I was really careful, which I'm not. And power cables, the same sort of way. Now, our power cables are all shielded, and they have 3 or 4 shields on them, so I don't pay a lot of attention. But a lot of power cables are not shielded, or they're very poorly shielded. They're not shielded properly. For example, when you shield a cable, whether it be a power cable or a signal cable, you want to make sure it's terminated, the shield is terminated at ground on one end, but not on the other end. Otherwise, it acts like an antenna. But there's a whole science behind that. Anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thanks for asking. Bye-bye.